Congresswoman, I spent a dozen years protecting presidents. I know exactly what a threat to this country looks like. And I'm telling you, the call is coming from inside the House. Dan Bongino, Director of National Intelligence, sat at the witness table in the House Intelligence Committee hearing room. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. Those were the eyes of a former Secret Service agent, trained to spot danger before it even showed itself. He had the build of a man who still hit the gym at 5 a.m. He had the voice of a New York street cop and a folder thick enough to end careers. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar leaned into her microphone. That familiar smirk spread across her face, the one she'd wear before lecturing someone she thought was beneath her. As the squad's most vocal member, she'd spent years perfecting the art of the righteous takedown. Today, she figured, would be no different. Mr. Bongino. She began dragging out his name like it tasted bad. Let me just be clear on your qualifications for this position. You're a podcast host, a Fox News personality, a man who's spent years spreading conspiracy theories to millions for profit. She shuffled her papers dismissively, not even trying to hide her contempt. You were what? A bodyguard? You stood outside doors while actual intelligence pros did the real work. You checked credentials. You wore an earpiece. And now we're supposed to believe you're qualified to lead the entire U.S. intelligence community? She glanced around at her colleagues, inviting them to share her disdain. AOC nodded approvingly. Rashida Tlaib smirked. With all due respect, Director, and I use that term very loosely, she said, I've served on this committee since before you even knew what a SCIF was. I've been briefed on operations you've only read about in classified documents you probably didn't understand. Perhaps today, we should be the ones asking the questions. The Democrats chuckled. A few even applauded softly. This was the Ilhan Omar they knew, the fearless progressive who'd stared down presidents and never backed down from a fight. Bongino didn't flinch. If anything, a slight smile crossed his face, the smile of a man who'd been hoping for exactly this opening. You done? He asked quietly. Omar's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said, are you done with the performance? He leaned forward slightly. Because if you're finished attacking my credentials, I've got some questions about yours. He opened the thick folder in front of him, and something flickered in Omar's eyes. The first hint this might not go as she'd planned. And, Congresswoman, Bongino tapped the folder. You're really not going to like them. Omar's smirk faltered for just a moment. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. The C-SPAN cameras caught it. Millions of viewers saw it. The hunter had just become the prey, and she didn't even know it yet. Bongino flipped open his folder with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. In interrogation rooms, in courtrooms, in situations where getting it wrong meant someone died. Before we get into the details, he said, his New York accent roughening his words, let me tell you something about myself, something that isn't on my resume. He looked directly at Omar. September 11th, 2001. I was NYPD. I was there. I watched those towers fall. I breathed that air, the air that was full of concrete, steel, and people. His voice dropped. I lost friends that day, brothers, guys I'd had beers with the week before, guys with kids, with wives, with lives they were never going to live. 3,000 Americans murdered by terrorists who hated everything this country stands for. He paused, letting the weight of it settle over the room. So imagine my surprise, Congresswoman, when I heard what you said about that day. He pulled out a transcript. March 23rd, 2019, Cahiers Banquet. You were the keynote speaker, And you said, he read directly from the page, was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He set down the transcript. Some people did something. That's how you describe the worst terrorist attack in American history? Some people did something. Omar's composure cracked slightly. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. That quote was taken completely out of context. I was speaking about the discrimination Muslims faced after 9/11, about the civil liberties that were out of context. Bongino held up another document. Let me read the full context then. Maybe that'll help. He read the entire passage slowly, deliberately, letting every word land. When he finished, the room was silent. Sounds worse in context, actually, Bongino said. You weren't just minimizing the attack. You were making it about you, about how Muslims were the real victims of 9/11, not the 3,000 dead Americans, not their families, not the first responders who are still dying of cancer from that day. Omar's voice rose. This is Islamophobic. You're using a national tragedy to score political points against a Muslim woman who I'm using tragedy. Bongino's voice cut through like a blade. I pulled bodies out of that rubble, Congresswoman. I carried pieces of people I couldn't identify. And you stood in front of cameras and described it like a parking ticket that inconvenienced your community. He leaned forward, his street cop instincts taking over. Here's the thing about 9/11. It wasn't something. It was mass murder. It was an act of war. It was 19 terrorists who flew planes into buildings because they wanted to kill as many Americans as possible. And every single one of those terrorists would have been thrilled to hear a United States Congresswoman describe their attack as some people did something. Omar tried to interrupt. You are twisting my words to... I'm reading your words back to you. Bongino held up the transcript. This is what you said. These are your words. If they sound bad, that's not my fault. That's yours. He set down the document. 3,000 Americans dead, and you couldn't even be bothered to call it what it was. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A Republican member was visibly struggling not to smile. Bongino reached for another folder. But that's not why we're really here today. Let's talk about how you got here. Literally, how you got to this country, because I've got some questions about that too. Omar's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, something like fear flickered across her face. Subscribe to see what the documents revealed about her past. Bongino opened his second folder with the methodical precision of a detective laying out evidence. Now, I'm just a former cop, he said, his voice taking on a deceptively casual tone. Not a fancy immigration lawyer, not a scholar, just a guy who spent 20 years learning to spot when something doesn't add up. He pulled out a stack of documents. And, Congresswoman, a lot of things about your history don't add up. Omar straightened in her chair, her expression hardening into defiance. These are racist lies that have been debunked 1,000 times. I will not dignify. I haven't said anything yet. Bongino held up a hand. I've just got documents, public records, things anyone can look up. Let me walk through them, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. He spread the papers across the table. 2009. You married a man named Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, correct? My personal life is not. It's a matter of public record, yes or no? Did you marry Ahmed Elmi in 2009? A long pause. Yes. Thank you. Bongino pulled out another document. Now, here's where it gets interesting. School records from the 1990s show an Ahmed Elmi at the same address as your family. Same last name as your father's original surname. Same age range as your brother. Omar's voice rose sharply. This is a conspiracy theory. This has been... I'm asking about documents. Bongino's voice remained calm. These are school records. Are they fake? Did someone fabricate them? The allegations about my brother are racist lies spread by... I didn't say he was your brother. Bongino tilted his head. I said the records show someone named Ahmed Elmi at your family's address. You're the one who brought up the brother thing. Omar froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Someone actually laughed, a sharp, surprised sound that was quickly stifled. Here's what I know, Bongino continued. In 2017, you divorced Ahmed Elmi, but you'd been living with another man, your current husband, since 2011. You filed taxes jointly with both men in the same year, 2014 and 2015. He held up the tax documents. Now, I'm not an accountant, but I'm pretty sure you can't file jointly with two different husbands in the same year, unless one of those marriages wasn't real. Omar exploded. How dare you! She was on her feet now, finger jabbing toward Bongino. How dare you attack my family? This is what they do to black Muslim women in this country. This is what happens when we dare to speak truth to power. She turned to the chairman, her voice cracking with rage. Mr. Chairman, I demand that this line of questioning be stopped. This is harassment. This is racism. This is Islamophobia. The chairman shifted uncomfortably. Congresswoman Omar, Director Bongino is asking about public records. You are free to respond or decline to answer. Declined to... Omar's voice broke. She turned back to Bongino, tears of fury glistening in her eyes. You are a racist. You are a white supremacist. You are everything that is wrong with this country. Bongino waited until she finished. Then he spoke, his voice almost gentle. You done? Omar was breathing heavily, visibly struggling for control. Here's what I know from 20 years in law enforcement, Bongino said quietly. When you ask someone a simple question, and they respond with accusations and personal attacks, it usually means they can't answer the question. He held up the documents. I asked about school records and tax filings. You called me a racist. That's not an answer, Congresswoman. That's a deflection. He set down the papers. The state of Minnesota investigated these allegations. They didn't say you were innocent. They said they couldn't prove anything because records were sealed or destroyed. You paid fines for campaign finance violations discovered during that investigation. He leaned forward. When someone pays a fine, they're not proving innocence. They're buying silence. You paid. What were you buying? Omar opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. AOC leaned over and whispered something urgently. Tlaib was staring at her phone like she wanted to disappear into it. Bongino reached for another folder. But the immigration stuff is complicated. Legal gray areas, I get it. So, let's talk about something simpler. Money. Campaign money. Money that's supposed to go to electing progressives. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Let's talk about where your money actually went, but wait until you hear about the $2.8 million. Bongino opened the third folder with the satisfaction of a prosecutor approaching his best evidence. In the Secret Service, we had a saying, he began. Follow the money. It never lies. People lie. Documents lie. But money always tells the truth. He pulled out a thick stack of financial records. So I followed your money, Congresswoman, and it told me quite a story. Omar had regained some composure, but her voice was wary now. My campaign finances are completely transparent, and have been reviewed by Tim Minette, Bongino said simply. Omar froze. Tim Minette, political consultant, ran a firm called East Street Group. Your campaign paid his firm, Bongino made a show of checking his notes, over $2.8 million, cumulative over several election cycles. He looked up. That's a lot of money for consulting services, especially from a campaign that's always talking about getting money out of politics. Omar found her voice. My campaign hired a legitimate political consulting firm to provide legitimate services. There's nothing unusual about... When did you start sleeping with him? The words hung in the air like a grenade. Omar's face contorted with rage. How dare! It's a legitimate question. Bongino held up a document. This is a divorce filing from 2019. Tim Minette's wife, his wife at the time, named you as the reason for her divorce. She said her husband told her he was leaving her for you. He set down the document. Now, the payments to his firm started in 2018. The affair was happening in 2019 at least. So, you were paying millions of dollars to a man you were romantically involved with, using donor money, money that people gave because they believed in progressive causes. Omar tried to pivot. Let's talk about your money, Director. Let's talk about how much Fox News paid you to spread lies about the election, about COVID, about... Sure, Bongino shrugged. I made money in media. I built a company. I took risks, worked hard, succeeded. I'll release any financial record you want to see. He leaned forward. Will you do the same? Silence. Will you release the contracts between your campaign and East Street Group? Will you show us exactly what services were provided for $2.8 million? Will you explain why payments increased significantly around the same time your relationship became closer? More silence. That's what I thought. Bongino held up another document. Here's what the FEC found. Multiple violations, improper payments, lack of documentation. Your campaign paid fines again. He set it down. You know what this looks like to someone who spent 20 years investigating crimes? It looks like you used campaign funds as a personal checking account. It looks like you paid your boyfriend millions of dollars while he was still married to someone else. It looks like the progressive champion who rails against money in politics was running one of the most financially questionable campaigns in Congress. Omar's voice was trembling now, with rage or fear. It was hard to tell. This is a smear campaign orchestrated by... This is your FEC file. Bongino held it up. These are your campaign's own financial disclosures. These are documents your campaign submitted. If they're a smear, you smeared yourself. He gathered the papers. Here's the thing, Congresswoman. You've spent years lecturing Americans about corruption, about money in politics, about the influence of special interests. And the whole time, you were doing exactly what you accused everyone else of doing. He shook his head. In my neighborhood, we had a word for that. We called it hypocrisy. But that's not even the worst part. He reached for his final folder, the thickest one yet. The worst part is what you said about other Americans, about their loyalty, about their patriotism. Let's talk about that. Like and share before the kill shot. This is where everything changed. Bongino set the final folder on the table with the gravity of a judge delivering a sentence. When he looked up at Omar, something had changed in his expression. The prosecutorial intensity had given way to something deeper, something personal. February 10th, 2019, he began, his voice quieter now. You sent a tweet. You remember this tweet? Congresswoman Omar said nothing. Her face had gone pale. Bongino pulled out a printed screenshot. You were responding to a journalist who asked about Republican support for Israel. And you wrote, he read directly, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby." He set down the screenshot. For anyone who doesn't know, Benjamins means $100 bills. You were saying that American politicians support Israel because they're being paid because of Jewish money. Omar found her voice, though it was weaker now. I apologized for that tweet. I said it was, you apologized because you got caught. Bongino cut her off. You apologized because even your own party leadership condemned you. Nancy Pelosi called it a deeply offensive use of anti-Semitic tropes. Your apology wasn't remorse, it was damage control. He pulled out another document. But it wasn't just the tweet, was it? A month later, you suggested that American Jews have allegiance to a foreign country? Dual loyalty, the oldest anti-Semitic slur in the book. He spread multiple printouts across the table. You've spent years questioning whether American Jews are really loyal to America, whether their support for Israel means they put another country first, whether they can be trusted. He looked directly at her. You've accused American citizens of divided loyalties, of putting money above principle, of being corrupted by a foreign power. He paused. And the whole time, you're the one with unanswered questions about your immigration. You're the one who paid your boyfriend millions in campaign funds. You're the one who minimized the worst terrorist attack in American history. You're the one who's been fined repeatedly for financial violations. He leaned forward. You've got some nerve, Congresswoman. Some real nerve. Omar tried to rally. I have been a voice for the voiceless. I have stood up for... Let me tell you a story. Bongino's voice dropped, becoming almost intimate. 1992. A little girl is living in a refugee camp in Kenya. Her family fled Somalia. Civil war, warlords, death everywhere. She has nothing. No home, no safety, no future. He paused. And then America said, yes. America, this country you spend so much time criticizing, opened its doors to that little girl and her family, flew them across the ocean, gave them safety, gave them opportunity, gave them a chance. His voice hardened. That little girl grew up to become a United States Congresswoman in one generation, refugee to lawmaker, only in America, only in this America, the one you call racist, Islamophobic, fundamentally broken. He stood slowly. And what did you do with that gift? You stood in front of cameras and said 9/11 was, some people did something. You accused American Jews of dual loyalty, while questions about your own loyalty remain unanswered. You took millions in donor money and paid it to your married boyfriend. You used every advantage this country gave you. And then you spent your career telling everyone how terrible it is. He pointed at the folder of tweets. All about the Benjamins. That's what you said about Americans who disagree with you. That they're bought. That they're corrupt. That they can't be trusted. He leaned over the table, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. But here's my question, Congresswoman. You accuse everyone else of divided loyalties, everyone else of putting money first, everyone else of betraying this country. He looked directly into her eyes. When exactly did you start believing the rules don't apply to you? When did America go from being your salvation to being your target? When did the country that pulled you out of a refugee camp and made you a congresswoman become the country you blame for everything? He straightened up. Because from where I'm sitting, the only person in this room with a loyalty problem is you. The silence that followed was absolute. Ilhan Omar sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide. She tried to speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And then the squad began to leave. It started with Ayanna Pressley. The Massachusetts congresswoman had been Omar's ally since day one. Sisters in the squad, united against the establishment. Now Pressley was gathering her papers with careful deliberation, not looking at Omar, not looking at anyone. She stood, walked to the side door, and slipped out without a single word. Omar's eyes followed her, confusion mixing with betrayal. Ayanna. Ayanna was leaving. Then Cori Bush. The St. Louis firebrand, who never backed down from anything, was suddenly fascinated by her phone. She typed something quickly, stood, and walked out through the main door. She didn't glance at Omar, didn't acknowledge her existence. AOC tried. She actually tried. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice unsteady, "I move that we take a brief recess to—" "The gentle lady's motion is out of order. This is a witness hearing, not a business meeting." But the line of questioning is clearly designed to out of order. The gentle lady will take her seat. AOC sat back, defeated. She looked at Omar, really looked at her, and something shifted in her expression. This wasn't a battle they could win. This was a massacre they needed to escape. She mouthed something, maybe, "I'm sorry," maybe nothing at all, and began gathering her things. Rashida Tlaib was the last to go. She stood abruptly, her face contorted with fury. "This is a disgrace," she shouted. "This is McCarthyism. This is—" "Congresswoman Tlaib, you are out of order. I don't care about your order. This is a political assassination, and I will not—" Security guards started moving toward her. Tlaib looked around wildly, realized she was alone, that no one was standing with her, that even her squad sisters had fled. She let out a sound of pure frustration and stormed toward the exit, slamming the door hard enough to make the water glasses shake. And Ilhan Omar, who had entered this hearing room with 4 squad allies, ready to defend her, sat alone at the committee table, surrounded by empty chairs where her friends used to be. The woman who had spent years demanding loyalty from others had just learned what her own loyalty was worth. The collapse came slowly, then all at once. Her hand, the one that had been pointing at Bongino with such righteous fury, began to tremble. She tried to lower it, but couldn't seem to control her own arm. You can't." Her voice cracked. The words died before they could form. Tears were streaming down her face now. Not the calculated tears of a politician performing grief, but the hot, angry tears of someone who had lost control completely. They cut visible tracks through her makeup, dripping onto the papers in front of her. She reached for her water glass. Her hand was shaking so badly that she knocked it over instead. Water spread across the table, soaking her notes, dripping onto her lap. She didn't even seem to notice. Her breathing had become ragged, the microphone picking up every gasping inhale. Her chest heaved as she struggled to find air, find words, find anything. I am a refugee. I came here with nothing. You don't get to. You don't get to. She couldn't finish. Her mouth kept moving, but no sound emerged. Just wet, choked sounds that the microphone broadcast to millions of viewers. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in, capturing every tremor, every tear, every desperate glance around the room, looking for help that would never come. Her squad was gone. The Democrats were frozen in their seats. The chairman was watching silently, making no move to intervene. Nobody was going to save her. Ilhan Omar, the firebrand, the provocateur, the woman who had stood on the House floor and lectured America about its sins, sat frozen in her chair, destroyed by her own words, abandoned by her own allies, unable to defend herself against simple questions. Bongino gathered his folders slowly. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just collected his documents with the quiet efficiency of a man who had finished his job. "I have no further questions for Congresswoman Omar," he said to the chairman. "I think she's answered everything the American people needed to hear." He paused at the door. "Or rather, she couldn't answer, which tells them everything they need to know." He walked out. Behind him, the cameras kept rolling on Ilhan Omar's motionless form, alone at the table, water dripping onto the floor, tears still streaming, surrounded by empty chairs and the ruins of everything she had built. The image would define her career, and 40 million Americans watched it happen in real time. What happened in that hearing room wasn't just a political defeat. It was an exposure, a systematic dismantling of the carefully constructed image that Ilhan Omar had spent years building. For years, she had positioned herself as untouchable. Any criticism was racism. Any question was Islamophobia. Any investigation was persecution. She had wielded her identity as both sword and shield, attacking her opponents as bigots while deflecting all scrutiny of her own conduct. It worked. For years it worked, until someone decided to simply ignore the accusations and ask the questions anyway. Dan Bongino didn't call her names. He didn't attack her religion. He didn't question her right to serve in Congress. He just read documents, asked questions, pointed out inconsistencies, and let the silence speak for itself. The days following the hearing were chaos for Omar's office. Her official statement, released 6 hours after the hearing ended, accused Bongino of a racist witch hunt designed to silence a black Muslim woman. It mentioned Islamophobia 11 times. It mentioned white supremacy 4 times. It mentioned the specific allegations about her finances, her marriage, and her statements 0 times. The statement was mocked mercilessly online. "She's still doing it," one viral tweet observed. "Still calling everyone racist instead of answering questions. Did she learn nothing?" The squad held a press conference the next morning, or tried to. AOC stood at the podium, clearly uncomfortable, and delivered a statement about the weaponization of congressional hearings against women of color. She did not take questions, neither did Tlaib, Presley, or Bush, all of whom stood behind AOC with expressions that ranged from defiant to deeply uncertain. Notably, Ilhan Omar was not present. Her office said she was unavailable. Reporters who staked out her home said no one had entered or left in 2 days. The hashtag #OmarExposed trended for 72 consecutive hours, the longest political hashtag trend of the year. The clip of Bongino's final question, "When did America become your enemy?" was viewed over 100 million times across all platforms. It was translated into 14 languages. Conservative media played it on loop, even mainstream outlets. What happened in that hearing room wasn't just a political defeat. It was an exposure, a systematic dismantling of the carefully constructed image that Ilhan Omar had spent years building. For years, she had positioned herself as untouchable. Any criticism was racism. Any question was Islamophobia. Any investigation was persecution. She had wielded her identity as both sword and shield, attacking her opponents as bigots while deflecting all scrutiny of her own conduct. It worked for years. It worked until someone decided to simply ignore the accusations and ask the questions anyway. Dan Bongino didn't call her names. He didn't attack her religion. He didn't question her right to serve in Congress. He just read documents, asked questions, pointed out inconsistencies, and let the silence speak for itself. The days following the hearing were chaos for Omar's office. Her official statement, released 6 hours after the hearing ended, accused Bongino of a racist witch hunt designed to silence a black Muslim woman. It mentioned Islamophobia 11 times. It mentioned white supremacy 4 times. It mentioned the specific allegations about her finances, her marriage, and her statements 0 times. The statement was mocked mercilessly online. "She's still doing it," one viral tweet observed. "Still calling everyone racist instead of answering questions. Did she learn nothing?" The squad held a press conference the next morning, or tried to. AOC stood at the podium, clearly uncomfort. 1 week after the hearing, a reporter caught Dan Bongino at a law enforcement memorial event in New York. The clip was still everywhere. The questions were still being asked, and Dan Bongino was still being Dan Bongino. "Director, some people are saying you went too far, that you were cruel, that you bullied a sitting congresswoman on national television." Bongino considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Went too far?" He shook his head slowly. "I asked questions. I showed documents. I read her own words back to her. If asking a public official to explain their public statements is too far, then we've completely lost the ability to hold anyone accountable." The reporter pressed. "But the personal nature of some of the questions, the marriage, the relationships." "She's paid millions of dollars of donor money to people she's personally involved with," Bongino interrupted. "That's not personal. That's public. That's campaign finance. That's exactly what we should be asking about." He paused. "Here's the thing. For years, Congresswoman Omar has called people racists for asking basic questions. She's accused anyone who disagrees with her of Islamophobia. She's used her identity as a shield to deflect any accountability whatsoever. And you know what? It worked. The media backed off. Her colleagues backed off. Everyone was too scared of being called a bigot to do their job." He shrugged. "I'm not scared of being called names. I spent 12 years getting shot at to protect presidents. I spent years on the streets of New York dealing with real criminals. You think I'm going to back down because some politician calls me a racist?" A slight smile crossed his face. She had every opportunity to answer those questions. She could have explained the tax filings. She could have released the campaign contracts. She could have addressed the 9/11 comments with something other than Islamophobia. She didn't. She chose to attack instead of answer. He looked directly at the camera. "That tells you everything you need to know. When someone can't answer simple questions about their own conduct, it's usually because the answers are worse than the questions." The reporter asked about the squad's response, about the accusations of racism and white supremacy. Bongino almost laughed. "I protected President Obama for years. Barack Obama. I would have taken a bullet for him. Did take risks for him. And these people want to call me a white supremacist?" He shook his head. That word used to mean something. It used to describe actual evil people who wanted to hurt others because of their race. Now it's just what they call you when you ask inconvenient questions. They've turned it into a joke. And the real tragedy is, when actual racism happens, people won't believe it because the word has been so overused. He straightened his jacket. Congresswoman Omar made a choice. She could have been a serious public servant. She could have used her incredible story, refugee to congresswoman, to inspire people, to bring people together. Instead, She used it as a weapon. She used it to attack. She used it to divide. She used it to deflect from her own conduct. He turned to walk toward the memorial. Put up or shut up. That's what we used to say in New York. You make accusations, you better be able to back them up. She accused everyone else of corruption, of divided loyalty, of putting money first. And when someone finally asked if maybe those accusations applied to her too, he paused at the memorial entrance. She couldn't put up, so she should have shut up. He walked inside, leaving the reporter behind. On television screens across America, the clip of Omar's collapse played again. The trembling hands, the streaming tears, the empty chairs where her allies had fled. The question that couldn't be answered: when did America become your enemy? And in Minneapolis, in a house that had once hosted celebrations of her historic election, Ilhan Omar sat in darkness, phones unanswered, future uncertain, facing the consequences of years of accusations that had finally been turned back on her. She had spent her career questioning everyone else's loyalty. Now, America was questioning hers, and she had no answer. If you believe that asking questions isn't racism, that accountability isn't Islamophobia, and that every public servant, regardless of their background, should have to answer for their conduct, hit subscribe and share this with everyone who's tired of being called names for demanding the truth.